Thank you. As we load in the room here, I want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to give a couple mentions. One is to Director of our Office of Women's Advancement, Tanya Del Rio, Laura Perel, our Interim Director of Boston Public Schools, my friend and former colleague, State Representative Laurie Ehrlich, who's here with us today. We also have great local nonprofits that are here today. Katiana Santiago Taylor and the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, Jane Doe, Katie Matrano, from a student speaker from Every Voice. We have colleges represented behind me today, from presidents from Emerson and Suffolk and Bunker Hill and Berkeley, and we also have ACOM, who is kind of the overseer of the college, not the overseer, but the collaboration with the colleges. We're here to discuss a very important issue and discuss the Trump's administration latest attack on the safety and well-being of our young people, especially our women. Secretary DeVos' proposal to change Title IX would be devastating for survivors of sexual assault. It would even make it harder for survivors to get the help that they need. It would force them to endure more severe instances of assault before schools intervene. It would create a division between young people and their education. In Boston, we've spent years improving supports for survivors and creating safe, healthy cultures in our school committees. I'm joined today by some of the leaders in this work. They'll tell you more about the reality of sexual assault on campuses. They'll tell you how they need to keep local supports for survivors up and not tear them down. The fact is, all over this country, the majority of survivors still do not report their assaults. Many people still fear that they will not be believed, and they fear that there's no hope for getting help, so they suffer in silence. This can have a devastating impact on our young people, and we've seen stories over the last couple of weeks about the impacts on our young people in not addressing these issues. The trauma and fear that's caused many of them to miss class, to fall behind, and to drop out of school. Many suffer mental and physical health issues. They miss out on educational and professional opportunities. And since women face the highest rates of sexual assault, this is a serious issue and a serious equity issue. Last night, I delivered my State of the City speech. I talked about how we as a city are showing a better way forward for this country. We're expanding opportunities for women and girls, for the LGBTQ community. We're fighting to close the gender wage gap. We're fighting bias and discrimination. And we're ushering in a new era where no one is left out, and certainly no one is left behind. Secretary DeVos' proposal represents the opposite approach. Needless to say, I strongly oppose this rule change, and I'm doing everything I can, and we're doing everything in the city of Boston that we can to stop it. I'll be submitting a public comment to the Department of Education, so will all the college presidents standing behind me and other college presidents in the Commonwealth. We're taking a stand for all of Boston's 200,000 students, from kindergarten to graduate students. They deserve to know that they'll be treated with respect and get the support that they need. They deserve to have nothing stand between them and their education. We're making sure that Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump's is hear our message loud and clear from Boston. We believe survivors, we believe women, and we believe they deserve more support and more compassion, not less. I encourage everyone who wants to weigh in on this issue, submit their own public comment letter at regulations.gov. It's important that Washington hears this message loud and clear. More than 53,000 people have already done that, have already included their voices in this conversation. That number is going to continue to grow. The deadline is January 28th, and we are welcoming you to use the facts in my public comments, which will be available on boston.gov, or facts that you hear here today will be available for anyone to be able to see and read and get it from them. No matter what happens in Washington, we are not going to go backwards in Boston. The Boston Public Schools' commitment to preventing and addressing sexual misconduct is unwavering. Our policies and protocols will continue without any changes, and our schools will continue to respond immediately and thoroughly every time a student comes forward. We will continue to hold our community to the highest standards. We didn't back down when Washington tore down protections for transgender students, and we won't back down now either. We will continue to build healthy cultures where everyone feels safe enough to learn, grow, and thrive. I urge everyone in American cities to make that same commitment. I'm taking this stand because it's the right thing to do. And as a member of this society, and as a feminist, it's my moral obligation. As mayor, it's my job to protect the health and safety of all of our residents. Again, I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I want to thank you for being a voice of reason, for helping us push back against this dangerous proposal. At the end of the press conference, we'll take questions on topic, and then when we're done with that, I'll take questions on other things for the press that's here today. And now I'd like to hand it off to President Pam Ettinger to speak on behalf of the Massachusetts Community Colleges.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon. My name is Pam Ettinger. I'm the president of Bunker Hill Community College in the city of Boston. Bunker Hill is the largest of our 15 community colleges across the Commonwealth, and we at Bunker Hill have about 15,000 students. There are 156,000 students in the community college system in Massachusetts, anywhere from high school dual enrollment students who are minors, to recent high school graduates, to adults returning to careers in higher education. And for over the last decade, we have worked to make our environment optimal for learning through our students' code of conduct, as well as our employee policies. Title IX, although it is an exacting set of standards and regulations, has afforded our students and employees a way to address harassment and gain a sense of safety in the teaching and learning environments in the workplace. We operate under the belief that there should be no wrong door to ask for help. And the process of fact-finding, like all student conduct issues, is conducted with neutrality and the right balance of openness and confidentiality. We have established, and most of our colleges, actually all of our colleges, have established an Office of Diversity and Inclusion that works with our Dean of Students, our Office of Public Safety, to ensure that the rights of our students and employees are respected, and those victimized do not get victimized a second time. In that context, a number of proposed changes in Title IX regulations are extremely worrisome. The raising of thresholds for the Title IX reporting and how that higher threshold interacts with our students' code of conduct, the requirement of cross-examinations rather than fact-finding by a neutral source, creating a quasi-judicial framework that is not appropriate for the learning environment. This is especially concerning because we have minors in our dual enrollment programs. The level of evidence asked for in fact-finding has escalated from preponderance of evidence to clear and convincing evidence. But most of all, the concern that in an attempt to fix what may not be an issue, that of due process, has created barriers for reporting, and there's a chilling effect for very vulnerable student victims. Thank you. And it is my duty to introduce my colleague, the president of Emerson College, Dr. Lee Pelton.
Thank you. Thanks, Pam. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Mayor, for your inspired leadership. You really set a high bar, I believe, for other cities in this regard. I welcome the opportunity to come to speak with you today, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the advocates who are here today, including our partners from the City of Boston and my colleagues at other Boston colleges and universities. It's an honor, a real honor, to be among such a terrific group of people. As we all know, colleges and universities are places of discovery and growth. We invest in our most valuable asset, our people, by working to make our campuses inclusive environments where all students can learn and create, take risks, and experience all that our respective institutions have to offer. And we do this knowing that when our campuses are inclusive environments, when they are free from discrimination, only then is it possible for all members of our community to thrive and to grow and to learn and to become the people they were meant to be. Over the past few decades, our nation's campuses have made significant progress in protecting this basic right, progress that was often guided by groundbreaking changes emanating from the federal government. We all know, or we should know, the landmark moments. In 1972, thanks to the courage and perseverance of women like Dr. Bernice Sandler, who passed away at the age of 90 last week, Congress enacted Title IX of the Education Amendments, which prohibited sex discrimination in any educational program receiving federal aid. And 2 decades later, in 1992, the Supreme Court first expanded Title IX protections to include sexual assault, calling all acts of sexual violence as a form of sexual discrimination. And in 2001, under the Bush administration, the Office of Civil Rights issued guidance on what constitutes sexual harassment under the law and how institutions were expected to respond. And in 2011, the Obama's administration's so-called Dear Colleague letter provided guidance for adjudicating sexual assault allegations, leading colleges and universities to face really hard truths and reckon with the acts of sexual violence that were too frequently occurring on our campuses and in our communities, and too often, as we all know, were going unreported because of the legitimate fears of survivors have of being shamed, of being disbelieved, of being re-traumatized. And today, as new federal regulations are being considered, we must be mindful not only of the progress that we have made, but also of the work that still needs to be done. And I fear that if approved without modification, the new regulations could risk reversing this critical trend. For example, since 2011, educational institutions have investigated unwelcomed contact of a sexual nature under Title IX. And the proposed new regulations narrow what would fall under the law as conduct would have to be severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive for colleges to take action under Title IX. In addition, the proposed regulations mandate live hearings, including cross-examination, as you just heard from Pam, and such a procedure within an educational setting far outside of a criminal court setting or proceeding would dissuade some, if not many, survivors from reporting sexual misconduct because they simply cannot subject themselves to the re-traumatization that will occur in that kind of hearing with cross-examination. These are merely a few examples of changes that, regardless of their intent, will have significant chilling effect on survivors participating in our Title IX processes. And when a survivor of sexual violence is deterred from coming forward, the repercussions can be enormous, deepening the trauma and making our campuses less open, less respectful, less inclusive, and less safe. We know this, that when students do not feel safe in our academic communities, learning is diminished and sometimes it is absent. The opportunity to thrive and perform at their very best is threatened. The proposed guidelines, if adopted without amendments, tear at the very fabric of our learning communities. The U.S. Department of Education has invited public comment on these proposed changes, as you well know, and we have the responsibility to make our voices heard on this issue. And our voices should be clear and loud. At Emerson College, we're encouraging our students to read the proposed rules for themselves, to think critically about these changes, and to exercise their civic duty by offering their comments. And in this spirit, I encourage all of us to recommit ourselves to building communities of learning, commonwealths of learning that are supportive and responsive to survivors of sexual violence, and to a fair and equitable process for all. And only then can we ensure that students of all backgrounds continue to be inspired and empowered so that they may engage fully and successfully in their diverse fields and pursuit of knowledge. Thank you very much. Now, thank you very much. Now it's my turn to turn this podium over to Suffolk University President Marissa Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, President Pelton, and thank you, Mayor Walsh, for your leadership on this important issue. And if I may, I apologize to all of you who are here today. I am fighting a cold, and I hope you can all hear me. At Suffolk University, we believe in the power of education to transform lives. Since our founding 112 years ago, we've been committed to the idea that equality of access to education is critical. Each and every one of our students deserves a learning environment that supports them and allows them to maximize their potential. And nothing should stand in the way of a student's ability to focus on his or her education. I'm concerned, and share the concerns you've already heard raised here today, that parts of the proposed new Title IX regulations, as written, could undermine that equality of access to education and could have a detrimental effect on the educational experience of our students. It is critical that students who have experienced sexual assault be encouraged to come forward if they wish, and that they feel safe and confident in doing so. I believe parts of the revised Title IX regulations, and particularly the cross-examination of parties during live hearings that will amount to, in essence, a mini-trial, may create a chilling effect, discouraging students who have experienced sexual assault from reporting it. The impact of a sexual assault on a student's life and on their educational experience can be devastating. We want to be sure that we are doing everything that we can to create an environment where students will come forward and take advantage of the many resources and support services that we provide. Those who've experienced sexual assault often find it very difficult to come forward, and adding a cross-examination process similar to courtroom proceedings could make reporting a sexual assault even more daunting. Similarly, I am concerned about changes that might no longer obligate universities to investigate incidents that occur off campus and outside of university activities. I see this as problematic, particularly for an urban campus like Suffolk's. Part of the urban nature of our institution means that many of our students are living off campus. Irrespective of where an incident took place, the impact on a sexual abuse survivor's educational experience can be devastating. If a student who has experienced sexual assault involving another member of the university community is not able to access the university's complaint procedures and support services simply because the assault occurred off campus and outside of university activities, once again, the danger is that incidents will go unreported. The proposed regulations should not introduce ambiguity about the obligations of universities to respond to incidents of sexual assault which affect learning on campus, regardless of where those incidents occurred. Fair and equitable treatment of all parties involved and the presumption of innocence are core values at Suffolk University. We believe, and our current process ensures, that the complaint process is fair to all involved and that due process rights must be guaranteed. But we also believe that the process must not serve to discourage students who have experienced sexual assault from coming forward and need not and should not attempt to approximate the criminal justice system. The impacts of sexual assault are traumatic. Those incidents are already underreported on campuses all across the country. We have a responsibility to do everything that we can to make sure students who have experienced a sexual assault are confident in coming forward and that they get the support they need, and that no student is denied the legal right to equal access to education because they are living with an unreported sexual assault. Thank you. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome to the podium Deborah Robin, Executive Director of Jane Doe Incorporated.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Walsh, and to all of the leaders representing higher education institutions here today, and of course the student activists working on these issues here and across the country. It feels like a breath of fresh air to hear these comments right now. Your leadership is so important as we mobilize together to stop these harmful, ill-informed, and troubling changes to the long-established protections for survivors of sexual violence. And it's an honor to have the opportunity to speak at this press conference, both to represent the membership of Jane Doe, Inc. and the network of rape crisis centers across Massachusetts, and as a survivor myself. Jane Doe, Inc. is a statewide membership and advocacy coalition comprised of 57 organizations across the Commonwealth addressing sexual and domestic violence. Those life-saving services all across the state support survivors and advocate for fair and meaningful policies and responses. Many of them have established relationships with their local schools and colleges, both to provide confidential services to those who have experienced violence and to craft prevention initiatives that focus on ending rape culture and fostering healthy environments for students. As I just mentioned, I'm also here today as a survivor of sexual assault. As a teenager, I was sexually assaulted on a college campus by a professor. This happened many, many years ago. At that time, campus sexual assault was not discussed, there were no resources, no one to talk with, and no opportunity for redress. I wouldn't have even thought of that. It took me decades to talk about my experience and to understand its impact, and it's a journey. Over those many years, rape crisis centers were established, hotlines were staffed, and the issue of sexual assault on campus became acknowledged and better understood. These are complex issues and require comprehensive responses. Title IX has been a bulwark of freedom to access of education and a meaningful tool to support survivors and hold offenders accountable. We aren't there yet, but we certainly can't afford to go back. The changes being proposed by Betsy DeVos and the Department of Education are significant and are designed to turn the clock back by limiting the number of complaints coming to schools rather than to create the conditions that support a survivor's interests in coming forward. The timing of these proposed changes stand in contrast to the current public dialogue about and reckoning with the pervasive and impactful climate of sexual violence and rape culture. Just in the last few years, we have collectively witnessed the undeniable wave of survivors speaking out, talking about our lived experiences, and asking for justice. Me Too, Believe Survivors, It's on Us, Surviving R. Kelly are just a few of the hashtags that represent the insidiousness and pervasiveness of sexual violence, and campuses are key sites where they flourish. And while sexual violence is an equal opportunity oppressor, not everyone is impacted similarly. Women of color and Black women, LGBTQ students, and those with disabilities are at highest risk for being sexually assaulted. This is not just about gender justice, it's about racial and social justice. While we can examine the many data points that describe an epidemic in sexual violence everywhere, we also know that this is the tip of the iceberg. Sexual violence is underreported, not reported, and sometimes not disclosed, as in my case, for many, many years. So why does JDI so strongly oppose these proposed changes to Title IX? Just a few examples. This rule would require schools to only investigate the most extreme forms of harassment and assault, forcing students to endure severe abuse before they can even ask for help. This rule would eliminate protections for students living off campus or in study abroad programs. And this rule imposes different burdens for victims than for other serious forms of misconduct. These are just a few examples of this horrific and outrageous proposal designed to keep us quiet, put us back into another era, contribute to the environment where survivors are not believed or supported. That this might happen in our educational institutions is even more egregious. Title IX applies to all education grades K through 12. Where else will this lead us? Schools should be safe environments that foster and nurture us, not limit our potential and our health and safety. This attack by Secretary DeVos and the administration is yet another example of their lack of regard for the role that responsive policy and systems play. Across the country, I have to mention this, due to the federal shutdown we're experiencing right now, rape crisis centers, domestic violence programs are facing a loss of funding that translates into a lack of access for services, to advocacy, to support, to information. This is all part of an effort to eliminate a safety net that has evolved over decades and isn't even strong enough. But here's one thing I just want to leave you with hope. We're not going back. We can't go back in time, and we won't go back in time. Thank you very much. And now, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Katie Matrano, a student body president at UMass Boston, the class of 2019, and the Boston Regional Outreach Lead for Every Voice, a great organization. Thank you, Katie.
Hello, my name is Katie Matrano. I'm a senior at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I'm a UMass student body president and the director of student organizing in the Boston area for the Every Voice Coalition, a grassroots student advocacy organization that is working to enhance Title IX policies across college campuses in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I would like to thank Every Voice, Jane Doe, and Mayor Walsh's office for inviting me to speak here today. Statistics that I'm sure you've all heard before today: 1 in 5 and 1 in 16. 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted during their college career, and 1 in 16 men will be sexually assaulted during their college career. These statistics are even higher for members of the LGBTQ community, people of color, first-generation college students, and other marginalized communities. There are approximately 152,000 students in the city of Boston, which means at a bare minimum, 9,500 students are survivors of sexual assault in this city alone. Now, I say at a minimum because these statistics are 30 years old, and they are still proven to be accurate today. This should concern all of us because how can statistics stay the same for 30 years? This shows either these are inaccurate or we have done absolutely nothing to change the statistics of sexual violence on college campuses. College is a time in people's lives to learn, find their passion, make new friends, and escape their comfort zone. Not a time to be violated in the worst way humanly possible. When I moved to Boston for college, I was ecstatic. I was finally able to move to the city I love, and I was ready for the next chapter of my life to begin. I finally moved all of my things in, and I was ready to start classes at UMass Boston in the fall of 2015 after Labor Day. However, I received an alternative welcome to college. I went to my first college party, and it was great. I was around my now best friends and started meeting new people, and at the end of the night, a few people came back to my apartment, and I later drunkenly passed out on my couch. That night, I was assaulted by someone who I had just met that evening in my own home. I confided to a friend, in which a friend of theirs responded that I was lying because she's a survivor of sexual assault and she knows what it's like, and I was just drunk and I regretted it. I never reported it. I never discussed it to anyone until 3 years later when I joined the Every Voice Coalition, and I never publicly admitted it until right now. I'm a criminal justice major and I'm aware of the steps that I could have taken. However, that immediate response from the people that I confided in stopped me from doing just that. Their response is a direct reflection of how our society has perpetuated victim blaming and continues to protect assaulters. The new Title IX policies orchestrated by Secretary DeVos is continuing to protect assaulters and shun survivors. I understand the importance of due process, and I agree with the constitutional rights of those accused. But this does not mean that their rights are more important than the people that they have assaulted. We must protect our students because they are told again and again that they are liars and that the rights of those who violated them are more important. These policies will continue to make sexual assaults go unreported, and the statistics that are 30 years old will remain true. We must stand by survivors and tell them we will protect them and believe them so they don't have to hide for 3 years and go through this alone. The time to act is now, and as the mayor has so powerfully said and agreed with, Boston will not sit by and watch the rights of survivors and other students be infringed upon. Students are not going to wait, and we are all working across the state as part of a grassroots movement like the Every Voice Coalition for change. In a time of need, we all need to come together with students, legislators, and administrators to set a higher standard and keep our campuses safe. This is not a difficult or an impossible task. instituting common sense legislative measures like student surveys, confidential resource advisors, mandatory training on consent and bystander intervention, and free access to health resources for survivors. Bills to enact these measures are sitting before the legislature today, and thousands of students from across the state have been working for 4 years to raise their voices for change. We have a responsibility to protect current and future students, and we will not stand back and allow for future students to have to be assaulted. I will continue to fight and to protect other students like my sister, who is applying to colleges this year, so she does not have to have the same welcome to college that I did. The legislator, policymakers, college presidents, other government officials, and stakeholders, it is our responsibility to make Massachusetts the example it needs to be for the rest of the country. Massachusetts has always been a leader for this nation, and it is time that we become a leader again, and it starts with a matter that so many choose to ignore. Thank you.
Wow, I don't know what to say. Certainly heard some powerful testimony today, and rather than weakening regulations and laws, we should be strengthening them on a federal level. Any questions for anybody that's here today? Yes.
If you don't allow the accused to cross-examine the accuser, how do you guarantee due process?
Do we want to grab that?
There are lots of ways to ensure that you are hearing both sides of a story without directly putting victims in a position of being cross-examined. It requires a commitment to ensuring that you're meeting with both parties, that both parties have the opportunity to have the right support system as they tell their stories, and it requires a commitment to having strong investigators who understand these issues and understand who on campus they need to engage with to support the survivors. It is possible, absolutely.
Can I take that?
Good.
So, a couple of things. One is that the case law tells us that with respect to adjudicating misconduct on campuses, including sexual assault, that we have to adhere to something called basic fairness. And that has three components. One is that a complainant or someone complained against must know what the complaint is, that there should be a judicial hearing of some kind, and that there be an appeal. In recent years, many colleges have moved to something called a single investigator model. So rather than going before a jury, as it were, or a group, that you have an investigator, sometimes external to the college, who investigates what happens, interviews the, what we call the survivor and the respondent, and a whole host of other folks who might have some knowledge or have some useful input on this, including the credibility of both the survivor and the respondent. And then that report then is delivered to what the department calls it's the decider, the person who makes the decision. And then that person will then, if it's worthy, will take that to a panel on campus who will then decide what sanction is appropriate. And that has, I don't know if it's common-wide, but it's become more so recently. And it's a way of making sure that survivors are not re-traumatized, as they are in the court system, by having to undergo cross-examination, and we talk about advisors in this case, we're talking about lawyers, seasoned lawyers, who are going to cross-examine 18, 19-year-old people in a very hostile environment, and that's what we're all opposed to.
Sean?
Do you anticipate be in a rush to change their policies with these new proposed rules?
I do not believe that we will rush to change these policies. I believe that there are way too many lives and educational lives at stake. There, I really don't believe at this point that there's a huge amount of support to shift to this new perspective. And the issue here is the idea that there's no due process is a false one. We have very tight due process, not only for Title IX, but for all of the other student conduct issues that we have on campus. We have been doing this for many, many, many years. So I don't believe the changes that are proposed is really aimed at due process at all, is aimed at weakening protection, and that's a problem.
Yes.
If schools don't follow the new regulations, now does that mean they risk losing federal funding if they're not in compliance?
I'll try and address that. I mean, there's been this threat of losing federal funding on every policy challenge that cities across America have done to the White House. And to be quite honest with you, there's not a lot of funding coming to cities and towns, and not a lot of funding coming to education. I think this is more of a stand on for the colleges on principle. I mean, even if there's a loss of funding, I don't think no college will make a decision based on losing funding. It's just like I've never made a decision based on losing funding to the city of Boston in my different stands I've taken against this White House. Any other questions on this topic?
Yeah, we recently spoke with a student who claimed she was sexually assaulted on campus, and her overarching concern is that regardless of the regulations, even schools that want to help or claim to help are so overwhelmed that they end up botching the process. So given limited resources, what more can schools do right now, regardless of whether the changes are made?
I really don't believe we're botching the process. The number of cases that's come through Bunker Hill Community College alone over the last 6 years that I've been there, each one of them has been clear. Each one of them has due process that's been executed. If that is indeed the case, and I'm not saying that it is, then colleges needs to put money where their mouth is, which is to strengthen your diversity and inclusion processes and bring someone on board to do that kind of work. It's not an excuse not to go through that process and then change to something else that, to me, is not half as effective.
Any questions on topic? Yes, sure.
I read that the new policy would give colleges more leeway for an informal mediation instead of a judicial process. Do you think that could be a concern for students?
Anyone know about that? We can get it afterwards, so we can do it after.
You want me to take that?
Get it.
Yeah, the policy makes that possible, but only if the survivor agrees to it. So we're less concerned about that, although there is some concern there. I will say to the other question, the earlier question, it's a matter of investment of resources in the college to ensure that that the processes that adjudicate sexual assault or sexual harassment are fair and equitable, but also that they provide support and also make sure that survivors aren't re-traumatized. And that's really, both of those are very crucial. And so at Emerson, we have an office with several people in it whose role is just to do that. We have a Title IX coordinating office with 2 people in it. We have a dean who reviews the investigatory report. We have an external investigator, as I mentioned, and lots of other resources for our students to make sure that the process can be as fair as it can. It will never mean that we're perfect. That's impossible. But it will mean that we're doing our very best, and we have a process in place that at least people can trust.
And in the Boston Public Schools, we do as well have the similar office and similar processes. Any questions off topic, I guess, or different topics?
This is about the Victoria Stewart in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
About opening up the garden. Specifically, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we're going to have the first, assuming the state gives the approval, we'll have the first recreational shop in Boston. I'm not sure what the timeline is for the state, but it went through an entire process. It went through being filed, community process, community meetings, more community meetings, an agreement with the city, zoning board of appeal, and now it's on to the state. So when the state, again, I don't know what their timeline is, how they operate up there for this particular issue, but we're well on our way in the city of Boston to have our first recreational marijuana shop opened up in the near future. It's the law. I mean, you know, in a way, I kind of want to get off my back because I'm watching the news every night, and every town's opening up a new shop, and you know, but we're learning from those shops opening up. I mean, in a way, I'm glad we're not the first because we didn't expect in one shop the traffic and the congestion, and so it allows us the opportunity to think about how we're going to handle some of these different situations. I'm not saying that we're going to handle them great. We're going to learn as we go along, but as we move forward, it's going to be an opportunity. So I believe what this proposal gets to do now, they get to build out the space. So while they're going through the process at the state, they get a chance now because they have the zoning board of appeal approval. They can start building the space out in what they want to do. I mean, everyone has concerns in every neighborhood. I mean, we hear it every day in different neighborhoods when we have the meetings, and you know, I keep falling back to almost every neighborhood in the city voted for it, and when it's coming to a community meeting, they're saying we don't want it. I mean, I've been in some neighborhoods, they say Marty Walsh wants to throw these shops in your neighborhood, and other places in the press, Marty Walsh doesn't want any of these shops, so it's one of those things that it's the law, and we're gonna have to live with the law, and I think that you know, we're going through a process now. I think the one thing that we're really concerned about here is equity, making sure that there's opportunities for businesses of color to be able to be in this industry, and many of the applicants we have a partner maybe, but we don't have a lot of businesses of color being able to get into this industry. So that's one area that's of concern, and then some of the councils have brought up concerns of placing these facilities next to or near medical facilities, or because the law prevents them from school, so we're covered there, but rehab centers and halfway houses and things like that. So those are a whole bunch of things that we have to work through.
Mayor, you said that you and the governor were going to be taking a road trip?
Road trip.
Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
we talked the other day. I mean, I just think we still have to set it up, and obviously down in D.C., you know, government shut down. The committees are just being set up this week. People are getting their assignments, so what committees they're going to be on, and what areas of government they're going to follow into. You know, we have to have some conversations on our teams on what issues that are the ones that impact all of us. And certainly going down to D.C., I think in the United Front's important. I think potentially the opportunity to invite other folks too as well, other mayors from around the Commonwealth. You know, just to come up with some solutions of how we're doing it here in Massachusetts and how we're doing it here in Boston and the relationship across the Commonwealth. I think that there's an opportunity for us to move forward. I was asked after the State of the City last night, you know, about Washington and about the shutdown, and you know, it's really frustrating. What it comes down to is that, you know, the president wants the wall, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and there's no dialogue on it, and you know, Democrats and Republicans aren't really excited about putting $5 billion into a wall. So is there a way for them to come together and come up with some compromise on what, you know, you get the wall, we get immigration reform? Is there an opportunity? That happens every day in politics in the country. It happens with the city councils and mayors, it happens with aldermen, it happens with selectmen, it happens with the legislature, it happens all over the country that there's an understanding, you know, to have a conversation. So what I felt was important that we go down there and talk to some folks, some key people, about how do we get some proposals moving for us here in Boston and Massachusetts, but also around the country.
Maybe driving together then, though.
I don't know if we'll drive, we'll fly, take a train, and we'll see what happens.
So no playlist, nothing like that.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I want to be in the car with him for 8 hours. No, he's, you know, I think he has a whole different taste in music. We'll see, but no, that's a joke. We're not sure exactly how we're going to go down yet. We haven't gotten that far. Our office is going to talk to each other about moving down, and again, what the agendas are. I mean, you know, I had a meeting today with the Secretary of Transportation at the state and the head of the MBTA, just 2 meetings before this, and we were talking about the need for revenue and what we want to see in the city. And then my next meeting was with the Convention Center Bureau, the new director of that, talking about attracting new businesses to Boston. So everything we do deals with the federal government. I mean, here today, you know, the policy that the federal government wants to change, it's almost like they're this office is thinking about, like, we haven't done anything in 2.5 years, so let's do something, and what they decide to do is go after Title IX when they have no agenda, no policy. There's been no conversation about advancing education in the United States of America. There's been no talk of infrastructure money in the United States of America. Like, they just seem to be, they have to do something. So what they decided to do was pick a very bad issue to start messing around with, a very dangerous issue to mess around with. Well, I don't know, we'll talk about, we'll see.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have one more
Yeah.
question on topic. So I think you were discussing earlier, I think it might have been Deborah, the Suffolk University president, the difference in the level of evidence being a concern for Title IX. So currently it's based on a preponderance of the evidence. What would the shift be, and how would that impact investigations at colleges?
I think, I don't know if you want to, I mean, I think a lot of this, as we answer the question, I think there's a lot of unknown area of what this change means. And I think that it concerns a lot of people, particularly in the university world and the educational world, about what exactly is the proposals that they're putting forth. What does that mean, and how does that change what we have? And I think that that's a concern that we all have. And I think that there's an unknown, because they're really not clear either with the change in policy. They're clear in the sense of what they want to do, but they're not clear in how to get there.
The distinction is the preponderance of evidence versus the clear and convincing, thank you, sorry. And those are just legal terms, but also really relate to how it is perceived and how it is understood. So this is something that we're looking at in the Commonwealth in terms of legislation here, I hope. And it would really change the way in which the evidence is understood and presented.
Great. Hi, everybody. Before we close, I'm Representative Lori Ehrlich, and I'm honored to be at my dear friend Mayor Walsh's podium right now. You heard last night that when you're looking for good policy, look to Boston. And he has been when he was in the legislature, I worked side by side with him, and he was a champion for equality and for the very topic that we're gathered here today. I just wanted to let you know that we're at the beginning of a 2-year term in the legislature right now. Our bill filing deadline is this Friday. There are some bills on this topic that are in the works right now. My bill dealing with campus climate surveys has already been uploaded to the system. If anybody is interested in discussing that, I'm happy to share it with you, or you can go find it yourself and we can talk about it. With right now, 3 out of every 4 sexual assaults go unreported. I expect that number to climb as students become more intimidated to report what's happened to them. So the climate survey, which has nothing to do with climate change, by the way, what that does is it gives students and anybody on campus really a voice as to what their experience has been. So the good administrators, the wonderful administrators we have behind us today can respond in a way that protects everybody on their campus. So look forward to talking about that, and thank you all for caring about this topic, and thank you, Mayor Walsh, for this incredible press conference. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Judy.